What is one of the creepiest things you have witnessed a girlfriend/boyfriend has done? Story 1. I was dating this guy for about 6 months, and everything seemed great at first. He was super attentive, always knew where I was and would even check in randomly throughout the day. I thought it was sweet, that he cared so much. But then it got weird. One night, I mentioned casually that I was heading to the grocery store. 10 minutes later, I got a text from him that said, "Did you forget your wallet? You're turning around." I hadn't mentioned it to him, but I was actually walking back to my car because I did forget my wallet. It was a little unsettling. Then things escalated. He started texting me detailed descriptions of where I was and what I was doing, even when I hadn't told him. Like, I'd be at a coffee shop, and he'd text, "That's a cute blue top you're wearing." I was sitting alone, and there was no way he could have known what I was wearing unless he was watching me. I confronted him about it, and he confessed he'd installed a tracking app on my phone, without my consent. He said it was because he loved me so much and wanted to keep me safe. But at that point, it was too much. I broke up with him that same day, and to this day, the idea of someone knowing my every move without my permission still gives me chills. Story 2. I have been dating this girl for a few months, and we became quite close. So close that we hardly had time away from each other. Anyway, one day she talked about moving in together, which I had no problem with. However, she wanted to do it immediately. I was sharing an apartment with a friend at the time, and I didn't want to ditch him without notice or without him having other plans. So one day my girlfriend calls me, sounding quite upset and crying. She said she had a fight with her parents, had unstable living arrangements now, and needed a place to stay. Thinking it was temporary, I told her to crash at mine until things settle. The same day, she turns up at the front with her car stuffed like a turkey, full of her clothes and other belongings. I remember the next part very clearly, as my heart jumped out of my chest and alarm bells were ringing in my head. I asked, "So, is this all your stuff?" She replied, "Not all, silly, we have to pick up more later." I was suspicious how quickly she went from "move in with me" to "I need to crash at yours." So I decided to call her mother and spoke with her dad, who my girlfriend apparently had a falling out with. I had a very nice conversation with the parents and found out my girlfriend is a pathological liar. Her lies continued to unravel, as the girl I knew was not the girl I was with. From what country she was born in, to how she was adopted, to her abuse by other relatives. It was all lies, because she in fact had a very wealthy upbringing and never had been deprived of anything. Then the parents asked if I knew about her scrapbook. "Scrapbook?" I asked. "If you happen to find the book, please don't freak out." I was curious and searched for it while she was at work. There in the book were my hairs, photos of me showering, and photos of me when I wasn't looking. I freaked the heck out. Once I confronted my girlfriend about all I found out from her parents, not the scrapbook. She put on the waterworks and continued to weave more lies through her sobbing, blaming her mother for being a meddling bee. Long story short, my head could not handle the drama much longer and basically ended it with her then and there. I still get a cold chill thinking about this story. Story 3. I had been dating this girl for a year, and she was always a little quirky, but it wasn't until we moved in together that things got creepy. She was really into dolls, like really into them. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was just a weird collection. But then, one night, I came home late from work, and she had lined up all her dolls on the bed, each one holding a note. The note said phrases like, "We missed you," "Where were you?" and "Don't leave us again." I laughed it off at first, thinking it was some bizarre joke. But she wasn't laughing. She just stared at me with this unsettling smile. Over the next few weeks, the dolls started appearing in other places. I'd wake up, and they'd be sitting on the kitchen counter or lined up on the couch, all facing me. She told me they watched over us when we slept, and that they could talk to her. I don't know if she believed it or if she was just trying to mess with me, but it got too much. The final straw was when I found one of them in my car, sitting in the driver's seat with a note that said, "Don't leave her." I ended things right after that. It was just too creepy for me to handle. Story 4. I had this boyfriend once who was obsessed with mirrors. It wasn't a normal obsession, like checking his hair or outfit. No, he would literally stare into mirrors for hours. I'd come over, and he'd be standing in front of the bathroom mirror, just gazing at himself. At first, I thought he was just vain. But then I started noticing that he wasn't looking at himself. He was looking at something in the mirror. When I asked him what he was doing, he'd say things like, "The other side is watching." One night, I caught him sitting in front of a full-length mirror in the dark. He wasn't moving, just staring. When I asked him what was going on, he looked at me and said, "They don't like you." "They think you should go." I laughed it off, but he was dead serious. He started insisting that the mirror people didn't approve of me, and that if I didn't leave, they'd make things bad for both of us. That was it for me. I got out of there and never looked back. To this day, I can't look into a mirror for too long without getting creeped out. Story 5. I dated this girl for a couple weeks, and it wasn't working out, just too different. I broke it off with her, and she was cool with it. Ran into her and her parents at the local bowling alley, and we all bowled together for a couple of hours. She started getting close to me like she wanted to get back together, but I told her no. So she walks up to her mother and tells her I tried to attack her. Mom looks at me, looks at her and slaps her, not hard, but fairly solidly, and tells her they are not going through all that BS again. Thankfully, her parents knew she was nuts and had played the attack card before on some other guy. Story 6. I had this girlfriend who seemed totally normal until she started acting a bit off. She loved asking me about my past, which is fine, but she became obsessed with it. She would constantly want to know about every detail of my life, especially past relationships. At first, I thought she was just being curious, but then I noticed she was writing everything down. One day, I caught her reading this little notebook, and when I asked her what it was, she said it was her record of me. She'd been documenting every conversation we'd had about my past, every detail I'd shared, even random things I'd mentioned once and forgotten about. She had a full timeline of my life, like she was building a dossier. When I asked her why, she said, "I just want to know everything about you so I can love all of you." But it didn't feel like love. It felt like she was trying to control my entire narrative. I ended it not long after. The idea of someone tracking every word I said felt way too much like being watched. Story 7. I was in a long-distance relationship with this girl, and things were going well, until they weren't. She started becoming distant, literally. Every time I tried to call or text, she wouldn't respond for days, then she'd come back with some vague excuse. I started getting suspicious, so I asked if everything was okay, but she kept brushing it off. Then, one weekend, she completely vanished. No calls, no texts, nothing. I thought something terrible had happened. A few days later, she reappeared like nothing had happened and told me she had been busy. But things didn't add up. So I did a little digging, checked her social media, talked to mutual friends. Turns out, she was living a double life. She was seeing someone else and just ghosting me whenever it was convenient for her. The creepy part. She had this entire fake life set up online with the other guy, complete with a different name, job, and even family members. When I confronted her, she just shrugged and said, "I like keeping my options open." That was the end of that relationship, but I still can't believe how well she had hidden it all. Story 8. This one still freaks me out to this day. I had been dating this guy for about a year, and everything seemed fine, until I discovered his collection. One day, I was looking for something in his closet and found a box. Inside were items that looked eerily familiar. Hair ties, a bracelet, even one of my old lipsticks. At first, I thought it was just stuff I had left at his place, but then I found more. Things that weren't mine: a pair of earrings, a scarf, a lock of hair tied with a ribbon. When I asked him about it, he smiled and said they were from other people he loved. He said he kept a piece of them so they'd always be with him, even if they weren't around. It wasn't just girlfriends, either. There were things from family members, friends, even coworkers. He didn't see anything wrong with it. He said it was his way of keeping memories alive, but it freaked me out beyond belief. I ended things right then and there. I didn't want to end up as just another piece in his collection. Story 9. I was dating this guy who seemed like a real go-getter. He had everything planned out: our dates, vacations, even small things like what we were going to have for dinner weeks in advance. I thought it was cute at first, but then it got really weird. One day I stumbled across this massive binder he kept in his closet. It was titled Our Future. I flipped through it, and I'm not kidding. This guy had mapped out our entire lives. Wedding dates, names of our future kids, our retirement plans, the house we'd buy, even what pets we would have, and their names. The weird part? We hadn't even been dating that long. When I confronted him, he didn't see anything wrong with it. He just smiled and said, "I'm a planner." I left the next day. I wasn't ready to commit to a future that was already written without my input. Story 10. I dated a guy who was really into collecting things, action figures, old books, you name it. I thought it was a harmless hobby. But one night, I was helping him clean up his room and found this hidden drawer under his bed. Inside were dozens of photos of me. They weren't cute, candid photos from our dates, though. They were photos of me when I wasn't looking, eating, walking, watching TV. He had pictures from weird angles, and I didn't even know half of them were taken. He tried to explain it, saying it was his way of capturing memories without me knowing, but it felt invasive. Then he told me he had videos too. He even had one of me sleeping. That's when I knew I had to leave. It felt like I was living with a stalker, not a boyfriend. Story 11. I had been with this guy for about a year, and while he was a little odd, nothing had truly freaked me out. Until one night when we were getting ready for bed. I was brushing my teeth when I noticed he was just standing in front of the mirror, staring at himself. I asked him what he was doing, and he said, "I'm making sure they know I'm still here." I'd asked him who they were, and he said, "The ones in the mirror." He went on to explain that he believed there were entities living inside mirrors, and that he had to check in with them every night to make sure they didn't take him. He said if he didn't, they might try to switch places with him. I thought it was some bizarre joke, but he was dead serious. The next night, I woke up to him standing in front of the mirror, whispering to it. When I asked him about it, he said, "They're angry tonight. They don't want you here." I packed my stuff and left that morning. I couldn't handle the idea of someone who genuinely believed in mirror creatures, let alone the thought of them not liking me. Story 12. My boyfriend was great with technology, always fixing my computer, phone, whatever I needed. I thought it was sweet how helpful he was, but I didn't realize how far he'd taken it until much later. One day, my phone started acting weird, so I asked him to check it out. He did his usual thing, and it worked fine again, but I noticed something strange. He never asked for my password. I brushed it off, thinking he'd somehow guessed it, but as time went on, weird stuff kept happening. He'd know things I hadn't told him, texts I hadn't mentioned, places I'd been that he wasn't aware of. When I finally confronted him, he admitted that he had all my passwords. For everything, my phone, email, even my social media accounts. He'd been reading my messages for months, but here's the kicker. He didn't think it was a big deal. He said, "I just wanted to keep you safe." The roller coaster came when I realized it wasn't just about safety. He'd been using the information to manipulate our conversations, acting like he knew what I needed before I'd even said anything. He was controlling everything, subtly guiding our relationship. I felt violated and left as soon as I could, but the emotional whiplash of realizing just how much of my life he'd been invading still haunts me. Story 13. Was dating a guy who was really into the paranormal. At first, it was fun, watching ghost hunting shows, visiting spooky places. It was our thing. But then he started telling me he was in contact with his ex, who had passed away a year before we started dating. He said she would visit him in dreams, and at first, I thought it was a coping mechanism, until things got weird. He started talking about her like she was still a part of our relationship. He'd say things like, "She wouldn't like it if we did that," or "I have to ask her permission." It got to the point where he was leaving an extra space at the table for her, saying she needed her place. It wasn't just grieving anymore, it was as if she was still there. One night, I woke up to him sitting on the edge of the bed, talking quietly to the air beside him. I asked what he was doing, and he said, "She's here. She wants to know why you're still with me." That was the last straw. I packed my things and left. The thought of him keeping his ex alive like that, to the point where she was controlling our relationship, was just too much. Story 14. I thought I had found the perfect guy. He was sweet, attentive, always knew exactly what I liked. But over time, his perfection became unsettling. He would say things like, "I knew you'd wear that dress," or "I just knew you'd want to order the pasta." It seemed cute at first, like we were so in sync, but soon it felt like he was anticipating every move I made. One night, after a few drinks, he let something slip. He told me he had been following my social media accounts for years before we even met. He knew everything about me before we ever had a conversation. My favorite foods, my hobbies, even personal details about my family. He had crafted his personality to align with everything he thought I wanted. The worst part? He didn't see anything wrong with it. He said, "I just want to be the guy you deserve." It felt like I was dating a stranger, someone who had constructed a false version of himself just to win me over. I ended it, but the realization that he had studied me like a project still creeps me out. Story 15. This one still messes with my head. I was dating a guy who seemed charming at first, but over time, I realized something was off. He had a strange way of getting people to do what he wanted. It wasn't just me, his friends, his family, everyone around him seemed to bend to his will. He had this way of subtly manipulating every situation to go his way, but he made it seem so effortless, like people were making their own choices. Then I found out he'd been doing it to me too. Little things like steering conversations, making me feel guilty for wanting to hang out with my friends, and even controlling when and where we'd go out. But it wasn't until I overheard him on the phone with one of his friends that I realized how deep it went. He was bragging about how he could make anyone do anything, including me. He had a whole plan to train me to be the perfect girlfriend, and I had been unknowingly falling for it. When I confronted him, he just laughed and said, "Everyone's a puppet if you pull the right strings." I left that night, feeling more violated than I ever had before. The idea that someone could manipulate me so completely, without me even realizing it, still haunts me. Story 16. This girl and I had been seeing each other for a couple of months. Apparently there was a protection mishap, so she ended up pregnant. I wasn't keen on the idea, but she wanted it, so I was being supportive. Still, she had a miscarriage. This girl apparently kept the rejected fetus in a jar. It was the most awkward phone conversation I'd ever had. She might have been off of her meds or on them or something, but up until that point, she'd seemed perfectly normal. Story 17. In high school, my friend was dating this creepy girl who would fake passing out from taking Advil for attention, sat there continuously taking pictures of him, called him 7 times in 5 minutes when he didn't answer, just all-around creepy/annoying behavior. He broke up with her at my house, then left. I was pissed about that. So I'm sitting in my room with her watching Beetlejuice, and she gets this really creepy look on her face and says, "I'm not going to let him break up with me. It's just not going to happen." And basically just went on a long monotone rant like that with the creepiest expression ever on her face until I was like, oh crap. I totally have something to do, and sped to drive her home. Story 18. I dated this real winner once. When I met him, he lived in a house, had a job, and just seemed to be a stoner. By the end of our relationship, he was jobless, homeless, and had gone to jail for my honor, or some creepy stuff like that. He beat his roommate up with a lead pipe because he thought the guy had the hots for me or something. Totally unfounded. Anyways, the real creepy part comes after he got out of jail. He still thought we were together, and would go camp out in my backyard when I wasn't home and sleep there. As in, he would pester my roommates into letting him into the backyard and sleep there. Story 19. We were on Skype one night, and I wanted to go to bed. This had apparently meant that I was going to cheat on her or some stuff. I don't know that she was crazy. Anyway, she yells a little, then grabs a knife and starts shrieking while rocking back and forth, cutting herself, on a webcam, while crying. Story 20. I was studying for my law exams that year, and my boyfriend, Alex, kept calling and texting, even though I was busy, and had told him I was studying. I went to bed only to be woken in the early hours by my ex scratching the fly screen of my window and whispering my name. He drove 40 minutes to my house because he thought I was trying to dump him by not answering my phone. I told him to go home, and we broke up not long after.
That's a wrap for this video. Make sure to leave your relatable story down in the comments. I would love to make a video on them. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.